Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Chad's transitional president is hosted in Russia and hails ties with the Kremlin. Moscow said it is willing to help Mahamat Idriss Déby further stabilise his country. Also, Tunisia is eliminated from AFCON, whilst Namibia stays in the game for its first ever advance to the last 16. Ivory Coast's coach, though, is let go halfway through the tournament after a disappointing performance of the host country's team. And fearless fashion. A Cameroonian designer's been celebrating the culture of her continent whilst living in Lebanon. Her brand is also a rallying point for campaigns against the abuse many African migrant domestic workers face, working under an exploitative system called kafala. But first, Vladimir Putin praised Chad's leader, crediting him for stabilising the country. Mahamat Idriss Déby's being hosted in the Kremlin. He took over in a coup in 2021, shortly after the death of his father. Déby's visit to Russia comes a week after Niger's prime minister spent time in Moscow as Russia continues its courting of Africa.
The leader of Chad is visiting Russia this week as Vladimir Putin continues his mission to extend Russia's influence in Africa. Chadian interim president Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno signaled that he is amenable to the overtures.
I came here from a friendly country, a brother country, a sovereign country that wants to reinforce relations with a friendly country.
Déby has led Chad since 2021, when a military council took power shortly after his father, President Idriss Déby, was killed fighting anti-government rebels. The junta initially promised an 18-month transition before elections, but has delayed them until next October, more than 3 years later. Last month, Chad's Supreme Court validated referendum results implementing a new constitution over the objections of opposition leaders who said the changes were made so Déby could stay in power. Putin said Russia is ready to be Chad's ally.
Dear Mr. President, we are closely monitoring the situation that is developing in your country. We are glad that it was possible to hold a referendum on the constitution. I'm confident that the elections will be held at a high level in the near future. We are glad that you have managed to stabilise the situation in the country, and we will do our best to assist in this matter.
Russia is looking to replace France's influence in the Sahel. Chad is France's last close partner in the regional war against Islamic jihadist militants. After they underwent political coups, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all forced the withdrawal of French troops in 2022 and 2023. All three countries have since drawn closer to Russia.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State is on his tour of the continent as part of Washington's bid to deepen ties with Africa. Antony Blinken headed out to Angola on Wednesday evening after having spent the day in Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy. Blinken said that he envisages more U.S. investment in the country, but called for more guarantees for investors that they wouldn't face obstacles in repatriating their funds. The diplomat headed to a tech district in the capital where he toured a showcase of Nigerian next generation innovations.
The future really is with Africa. It's no secret to anyone that in the coming years, 1 in 4 inhabitants of this planet will be from this continent. And so we would ignore Africa at our peril. But we also see the incredible power in these partnerships in actually solving problems together. And when we're thinking about Africa, Nigeria has to be front and center. The largest country, the largest economy, the largest democracy. It is a natural partner.
Look now at some news in brief. In Johannesburg, a man is set to appear in court in connection to one of the deadliest urban fires in the world. At least 77 people were killed when a crowded housing block went up in flames last August. A 29-year-old man's reportedly come forward to admit that he started the blaze as he tried to cover up a murder in the building. The bodies of victims of the 1994 slaughter of Tutsis and moderate Hutus in Rwanda continue to be unearthed. The remains of 119 people have been found over 3 days in the village of Ngoma in the south. Volunteers fear that many more could be discovered in the mass grave, which was found beneath a family home 5 people have been arrested on suspicion of complicity in genocide. The genocide saw an estimated 800,000 people killed over 100 days. Namibia's president has headed to the US to be treated for cancer. Haig Geingoob's condition was discovered earlier this month during a regular checkup. His vice president is due to take over presidential duties until Geingoob's return on the 2nd of February. Now, Senegal is often seen as a beacon of democracy in West Africa. The country's never experienced a civil war or a coup d'etat. But with just over a month to go until the first round of the presidential election, Human Rights Watch has issued a damning report on what it described as a pre-election crackdown on civil liberties. Sam Bradpeace tells us more.
Human Rights Watch has cast doubt on Senegal's ability to hold free and fair elections in February, notably while hundreds of political opponents remain languishing in prison. The organisation says at least 37 people have been killed in violent clashes since March 2021, and that there has been no accountability for these killings, notably for those committed by the security forces. Meanwhile, the organisation has pointed to a crackdown on the freedom of the press as well, highlighting as an example the suspension of certain media groups, the detention of journalists, and the fact that journalists have also faced threats and actual physical violence. I personally witnessed last year during a protest a Senegalese journalist being bundled into a police van where he said he was later beaten up by the police themselves. Human Rights Watch has equally criticised a crackdown on the freedom of assembly, an erosion of due process, appalling detention conditions and torture in detention. The Senegalese government has yet to issue an official response to this latest report.
Well, on the final day of the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations group stages, and Namibia's drawn with Mali and has been sent through to its first ever last 16. Tunisia, meanwhile, has been eliminated after its draw with South Africa. Some pretty tame on-pitch action on Wednesday was balanced with explosive off-pitch news that AFCON hosts Ivory Coast have sacked their coach midway through the tournament. James Vasner brings us more from Ivory Coast.
We thought that it was full of action at the Africa Cup of Nations, especially in this edition, but we've just had not one but two 0-0 scores tonight, goalless results, the first two so far this tournament. So for anyone who might have not been following too closely, could perhaps get a sense of how much excitement there has been in the last few games. Today it had to come and it ended that way, but that's not without some drama especially for Tunisia, who crash out this time in the group stage. A massive disappointment for them. They were unable to create anything this time around, and that was the same thing for them again tonight. Nothing on their side. Mali, meanwhile, also drawing in their game against Namibia, which means that in their group, nothing changed ahead of compared to ahead of the game. Everyone gains a point, which means that Namibia do actually manage to make it through in third place. South Africa also too, and Mali, as expected, go into the round of 16. But all eyes are going to be on Ivory Coast's destiny, which will be decided tonight. They have now fired, as you mentioned there, Jean-Louis Gasset. That was an expected turn of events, perhaps not during the tournament, considering that they could actually continue. For now, the interim manager will be taking place, but Gasset stepping down after an abysmal performance at that 4-0 loss against Equatorial Guinea earlier this week, which was a massive, massive slap for the host nation, not something that you wanted to see, but they're taking action, and that's how things will be going on for them if they do continue. Now, Jamel Belmadi, Algeria's coach, has also been left out. He's left the team. He's been a huge favourite for the team, bringing them to that win before. But since then, since 2019, they haven't actually won a single game. They crashed out once again in the group stage last night, causing a huge amount of uproar from Algeria fans. And that was the logical step to come. But it has now been announced that Jamel Belmadi is stepping down from the Algerian team.
James Vasner there for us. Now, a Cameroonian fashion designer has been celebrating the designs and fabrics of her continent whilst living in Lebanon. Game maker Jufa Vianney set up her brand, hoping to raise awareness also about the abuse and injustice that many African migrant domestic workers face, working under an exploitative system called kafala. Clarice Fortuné has more.
Her work might not be on a runway in Paris or New York, but for Cameroonian designer Gwemakwe Djoufa-Vianney, fashion has always been her dream. But instead of completing her studies in France, she found herself in Lebanon, working as a domestic worker. She still managed to establish her own fashion brand, but it has not been easy.
I found myself in Lebanon doing cleaning and facing a lot of abuse, a lot of stuff. I was even through stuff that it's not easier for me to speak it to myself.
Vianney is among hundreds of thousands of migrant workers in Lebanon, most of them working under a sponsorship system known in Arabic as kafala, a contractual agreement that grants employees total control over them.
You are imprisoned, you are controlled, you are directed by someone else. Your life does not entirely belong to you.
After years of work under the system, Vianney vowed to become an activist for migrant workers' rights. She says that through her designs and her sewing machine, she found an outlet to tell her story.
My dream for my brand is to be able to share my story, to bring the story of Vianney de Marceau, the beginning and the going of Vianney de Marceau all around the world, to people to know that I started through a system that reduced me down to someone that is less than human, and through it I become who I am and be proud of who I am.
Vianney hopes her brand celebrates her heritage and culture, but also will provide an opportunity for migrant workers like her to pursue their dreams.
Looking good. Well, that, though, is all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
In 2016, Yahya Jammeh, the Gambia's president, was defeated at the polls after 22 years in power. But the terror unleashed by his government remains etched in people's memories.
The 22 years of Jammeh's regime or more was more or less of a very brutal regime where people's rights were trampled on.
Since the end of the dictatorship, numerous accusations against Jammeh and his militia have emerged.
The current government has promulgated certain laws that can try crimes of torture. I'm very hopeful that very soon we will have justice.
Watch Yahya Jammeh's The Gambia Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.